Well, good morning. I appreciate you getting up early if you've had a long Ignite week. So my name is Lachlan Cash. I've got a session for 45 minutes here to take you through some of the updates that we're doing in Microsoft Dynamics 365 supply chain management. And so this was a change that was made in the July timeframe. Obviously, we're working on the finance and operations product, but we have a new SKU and a licensing option for customers, specifically looking at using the supply chain management functionality. So we are, as our team, we build all of the supply chain capabilities specifically to support the different industries. And so that's what I wanted to take you through in terms of what are the capabilities that we're focused on, and what are we released in the product just recently, and then what are we working on coming up. So primarily our focus is around supporting the supply chain capabilities in the finance and operations products for manufacturing, distribution, retail, professional services. So when we look across those manufacturing, distribution, retail, for example, we're talking about the raw materials management, inventory control, so the warehouse management, and that's the functionality that we're building and enhancing. The warehouse management, inventory control, of course, is integrated to the solution. And as we grow and we have larger and larger customers and customers looking for more automation, we're adding more and more functionality to those. So in terms of supply chain, essentially we're working on the backbone of those capabilities from planning, inventory control, warehouse management, distribution. Then when we get into the specific industries like manufacturing, for example, we're focused on helping those manufacturers produce the goods or manage their operations. So some of the things that we've been working on is connecting the ERP, which is the finance and operations product, to the shop floor, which is some of the IoT intelligence work that we've been doing. We'll have a talk about that. And so if I can make that connection to the assets that I have, the machines, the plant, the building, then I can do maintenance on it. And so that's where we've been enhancing some of the vertical manufacturing type functionality with capabilities that we've been working on. So that's the space that we're working in. That's our focus when we look across in different industries and where we're trying to build functionality to support these industries. When we look at professional services, for example, not just service-based businesses, but a lot of service-based businesses, we have customers that are in the construction space, for example, use our professional services capabilities, but of course need inventory management, warehouse management as well. So from a supply chain perspective, we're trying to support functionality across the different industries. And so that's really key in terms of what we're focused on. So where have we been adding functionality and what's been released in the product? So one of the capabilities is planning and optimization. When we talk about inventory, talk about raw materials requirements planning, we needed, and we have had a planning capability in the product for a very long time, going back many versions. This has been an area that customers have always been pushing us to do better. We need to be able to plan quicker. If I can plan quicker, then I can do many planning cycles in the course of a day or a planning cycle. And so what we've done is taken the master planning engine capabilities and we've stood them beside the application as a microservice. And this gives us the ability to scale up and down that planning capability independent of the core backend. Because often when we talk about the planning, we need to have a lot of data that's analyzed in a short amount of time. So instead of trying to scale up the whole application by putting more hardware at it, for example, we can now just scale up and down the master planning service or the planning and optimization service as we need, as customers run it and as they need that demand. And so this is going to be a continued focus for us. We've been working specifically at the core inventory distribution planning scenarios, and then we'll come back and add additional capabilities to it in terms of support for the manufacturing space, the scheduling capabilities, for example. So The key here is that we're really trying to get to hyperscale in what customers are demanding. So some of our customers that had planning runs to do inventory planning, for example, went from hours down to minutes, and that's our current goal with the service, is that we can really take customers down to minutes instead of hours, and that's in the current implementation. What we eventually want to get to is getting it down to seconds, and so therefore people can run simulations eventually that I can do a master planning run, see what the outcome is in terms of what I need to purchase, what I need to procure, where do I need to move materials. If I can run that in minutes, I can run multiple runs, and then we can start to add comparative and optimization functionality to do comparatives in terms of what if I change. So we haven't got there yet in terms of some of those what if scenarios, but that's essentially where we want to get to once we have the speed of the execution and the ability for the customer to consume that data in an efficient way. Then we can start to add that functionality. So these are the building block capabilities that we're looking at to support larger and larger enterprise customers that are deploying finance operations and the supply chain functionality. So really what we wanted to do is get this in a real-time fashion. Today, or when we look at our previous versions, customers ran this as, I'll run it on a weekend as a static plan. I'll do incremental plans through the course of the week. I'll run it overnight, for example. But we're really trying to get that down to they can run it wherever they need, do it real time, and see the effect of new demand, whether that's a sales coming in or changes in production and stuff like that. So that's really the key goal. So I'll show you some of these capabilities. When we jump in a little bit a second, we'll have a look at the product, for example. So connected manufacturing. We've had manufacturing capabilities, and that's been a strength of finance and operations product for quite a while. When we look at our customer base, our traditional customer base is really in the distribution, manufacturing, and of course we support process, discrete manufacturing capabilities, and of course lean capabilities. But we haven't really had a good connection to the floor, so to speak, or the machines in that environment. So we've been working on the connected manufacturing, or IoT intelligence. Now, for us in the back end in the ERP application, we need the signals from that shop floor. If I put in a planned production order, is the machine available, or is the machine planned for downtime when we look at the asset maintenance perspective, or has something just happened that I can't actually run the machine at its efficiency, so I need that signal to come back. So when we look at that, we have the equipment on the floor. Now, from an ERP perspective, it doesn't make sense for us to build the infrastructure to take signals from that. So luckily, because we're part of Microsoft, there's a whole team working on that, which is the IoT hub, and we can take advantage of that. So what we've done is build that connection between the digital ID, which is the device in the floor. That IoT connectivity is done through the IoT hub, and then we can make a connection to the back-end ERP. And therefore, we have the ability through the IoT intelligence add-in that we've built is making that connection and getting those signals back from those devices. Now that we can get a signal back as a notification or some sort of event, some sort of measurement, then we can do something with it in the ERP application. And so this is really what we've been working on to try to bridge that gap between the core back-end functionality and really what's happening with those devices, whether that's a machine on the shop floor, for example. So essentially, now that we have those capabilities, which is really, I can monitor in real time what's going on. I can build indicator screens in the application so that operators can see what's happening. And we've done this in conjunction with a few different customers, and I'll show you that in a minute here, for example, a few sort of screens. What it gives us the ability to do is monitor that. I can build a dashboard while I might not need to change something, for example, in the back end ERP, if I'm doing some sort of monitoring of some sort of sensor in the floor, I can at least see that visualization of it in ERP where I would be working, for example. So I could diagnose production issues with that. Is the machine down? Will it delay production? So now that we have this data passing backwards and forwards, we can apply analytics on top of it to look at that stream of data that's going backwards and forwards, and then get those insights and turn them into actions in the product. So let's have a quick look at some of these capabilities. So the first one, I talked about the planning service. So if I jump into the application here, we have a look at master planning, for example. And so for the customers, we wanted the ability to have a very simple turn on. Because we're running and managing a cloud service, we didn't want them to have to deal with, well, now how do I change between our classical planning engine in the core ERP, and then how do I enable this microservice? And so this is really just a one switch parameter. And the idea is that then we'll take care of all the infrastructure change at the back end and how that data moves between the cloud run Dynamics Finance and Operations, supply chain, and then the data moving backwards and forwards. So that's really the turn on capability experience of it. So once I turn that on, the microservice will be provisioned and the customer can use that within their environment. So that's how we're really trying to get the benefit of running that cloud service. To the end user, the execution of it will appear no different. They will go and run master planning. They will do their normal filter criteria, and that would be the execution of the process. So it's really no different to running the standard planning service in the application. So that's really the key capability that we're looking at providing here. And I clicked cancel too quick, or didn't. Let me start it back up. Okay. So to the end user or the planner, when they're looking at the output, I'm going to look at within the context of the application, still looking at within the context of the planned orders and those within the application. So, so really from an execution perspective, the normal planning cycles is going to be as simple as it's always been from that point of view. We're taking care of that infrastructure at the back end. Now, we're talking about IoT intelligence as well. So when I have a look here, you'll see the logo at the top of a customer called Margins. So they make snack foods in Australia, for example, and we've been developing this IoT intelligence functionality with them. They needed the ability to get sensor data back from their production run. So they make potato chip snacks, for example. Now the moisture and the salt content will vary the taste of the product and just the crispness of the product, which is what the customer is looking for example. So with the ability to go and turn on the functionality, within the application, we have to make that connection between the ERP and the IoT intelligence capabilities. So here we have our indicators in terms of, for example, equipment downtime, equipment performance, and so we can enable these by activating them. In the activate process, this is where I'll make that connection between the device and the data that's coming from IoT, and then essentially I have my subscription, and so I make this connection to the IoT hub, and therefore I can make that connection to the equipment that I might have. So I can select my equipment. So we're essentially providing a wizard-based approach to make that connection to the device and the data to the back-end ERP. And that's really the key point here, is that we don't want to do all that work in terms of collecting that data. That's what the IoT hub is going to do. We just need to make the connection and get the data back here. Once we have that and enable those indicators, then we can start to make screens and visualizations of them, and that's essentially what we've done, for example. So if I go into production control, you'll see here, for example, that I have, let me do it on this one. So when I go into production control, you'll see I'll have resource status, for example. And so in this case, for process manufacturing, I might be wanting to monitor what's happening on that particular plant run. And so in this particular case, I might have some sort of a value that I might want to monitor. And so we can have that in the back end. The data will be coming from the IoT sensor, and then the operator can be using F&O, whether they have a tablet, they can walk around the floor, at least they can see those indicators and respond. So in this particular case, we'll see that there's a salt value that's not within range. So that maybe won't delay the production, but at least I need to manage the tolerance of those. So I can go and change the equipment and just put that back into tolerance if I need to speed up or slow down the machine, for example. And so this gives us that ability to do that. At least see that data and then respond to it. When I look at the production floor management, for example, what I have the ability to do is also see the notifications. So the notifications gives me the ability to see what other events that I've subscribed to in that connection that I've made to those events. And again, in this particular case, for example, I can see maybe a piece of equipment has stopped reporting production. Maybe that means the piece of equipment is down. I might need to go and see what production jobs would be affected. So I have 2 production orders here and 2 operations that might be affected if this piece of equipment is down. And so that's the intelligence that we need in the back end so that I can then go and take control of that event. If the machine is down, I could go and replan, for example, and find if there's other equipment that I could replace it, or at least look through my entire supply chain. If this means that I might be delayed on those production orders, maybe I can then follow up customers, or I could make alternative arrangements. So this is the starting point of trying to say, how do we really respond to those events in the supply chain, and then make a sensible decision in terms of how that's going to affect not only our operations for cost management, but also to the end customer that we're trying to deliver these products to, for example. So I can take action with these, and we'll talk about that in a minute, relevant to the asset management, for example. Alrighty, so this is really being a big investment area for us in terms of really bridging this gap to the back-end ERP. So we're quite proud of what the work is. So as we sort of saw in some of those screens, there's a notification service. So I can use that to respond. Those notifications can give me actions of equipment down, for example. I can use them to automate events in my shop floor, move inventory around, reschedule, for example. So it also gives me the ability to look at the operational insights or the machine health through analytics, for example. So I can use those to present, obviously, with the capabilities that we have in the context of Power BI. And so when I look at production, I might want to look at typical metrics like OEE, so availability, performance, quality, and then those obviously is what I might manage from a top-level perspective around how my production is running. So now that we have the data, we have those asset capabilities in terms of all of the infrastructure that we have with Microsoft and the Microsoft assets, we can visualize these capabilities for people like the production managers, for example. So that's really what we're trying to do with IoT intelligence. Now, this bridges us into asset management. And so we've always had a fixed asset module within finance operation, which has really been around the finance aspect, around running depreciation, the financial aspect of looking at the expense of having that particular asset from a financials point of view. What we haven't had is the plant management side or the service sort of side of the asset. And that's what we've really done here with incorporating a module that we acquired from a partner and then incorporating it in the core product. So this is really what asset management is for us, which is really handling that space of the plant maintenance or asset maintenance. And so what's covered in here is the ability to acquire an asset is already in the product. We can use the procurement functionality to buy something that can be linked to fixed assets. But the blue areas is really where we've added functionality around maintaining and managing the asset. So in terms of defining what an asset is, so the asset register, spare parts controls in terms of what parts are related to an asset, multi-level asset structures. This is quite common when we have engines, for example. There could be rotable components on an engine that I need to maintain differently to the core vehicle that the engine is in, for example. So building up those asset structures, I can have different counters to help me with preventative maintenance or planned maintenance. So those counters can indicate when I've got my relevant service intervals that I might want to do my maintenance on the product. It can help me with breakdown maintenance, and this is where we have the connection with the IoT intelligence, because if a machine's broken down on the shop floor, I might need to repair it, for example. So we can have maintenance checklists, we can have fault management information that we might want to track relevant to our asset. And then, of course, all of the activities in terms of consuming a spare part when I do some maintenance on the asset, those obviously add to my cost control so that I can see the cost that I'm putting in relevant to this asset and then build up that history of what's happening with that asset. So this is a huge new module within the core product and really fits well within that vision that we have in terms of providing these core building blocks for customers like manufacturing customers that need this functionality to not only just produce the goods, but manage that overall life cycle of producing goods. So when we switch back to the application, you'll see we have the ability within certain places. I could create a work order, in this particular case from a notification, but you'll see that we have the asset module here, so asset management. This is where I'm going to find, for example, all of the setup and management for our assets. So our asset register, I could look at our work orders, I can look at the link to procurement, I could look at all my reporting and maintenance requests, for example. So an asset is something obviously you define. So let's say, for example, it's our conveyor belt here. This is where I'd find things like our maintenance requests, event history of what's happened to that asset, work orders that I might be working on. So, of course, a work order is going to track all that time, materials that I'm going to apply when I do either preventative maintenance or breakdown maintenance, for example. So we can have a look at event history, for example, and this is our event history log that we can keep track of what's happened to that machine. So as we do activities on it, we can track the history of that asset. So quite a comprehensive module that we've included in the product based on the partner solution that we've bought, and of course we've done that plumbing to connect it with the IoT intelligence. So that's something, if you're in the manufacturing space, we've got a lot of customers that have been asking for this for a very long time, so we finally got around to doing some of that sort of work. So that's kind of a key capability for us. In that manufacturing space, typically handles in the manufacturing area. It can also help in distribution, but in the core distribution sort of space, inventory management, we've been really spending a lot of time in the warehouse management, transportation management area. And so we have had a warehouse management module for a long time, since the previous on-premise version, AX 2012, and we've got a lot of customers that have adopted that, and a lot of larger and larger customers growing and growing. Taking that feedback in, we've acquired some additional partner functionality over the last 9 to 12 months, and that's what we've been incorporating into the product. So these are the new capabilities that we've been incorporating in so that we can answer some of those requests that customers have had for improving processes. So when we look at it from a perspective of inbound activities, outbound activities, and inventory control, we have things like blind returns receiving, so that I can improve the process if a truck just shows up relevant to return. Quality control, so we have had the ability to integrate quality, but it's been a little bit clunky in terms of the setup. So improving that flow in generation of it connecting to a quality order so I can do quality processes or additional quality processes when goods come back. But more importantly, our focus has really been around the outbound. So this is really trying to help customers with getting goods out the door. And so the key here is around what are those activities from release or waiving goods to be shipped through to moving the goods in terms of the picking process and getting them to a staging location so that we can ship out. So functionality that we've been adding, which is, for example, enhanced load building, so I can optimize how I build loads and stage them to be put on the truck, for example. A common one is improvement around wave label printing. We have customers that ship to Walmart, for example, so Walmart's order needs to be sequentially numbered for the 6,000 cartons that I might need to be put in the shipment. So when the wave runs, we can trigger that print. So we have customers like 511, outdoor apparel manufacturer, who've done these as customizations. When the wave runs to move or generate the work for the picking, they generate the labels, stick them on the carton, that box runs in front of the picker and they put it in. And so we've just been taking those feature requests from customers and putting those in the product as we go so that we can help those customers to improve their process. So improvements to manage real-world events that happen when we're trying to ship goods. I might be planning a load and the truck comes up, but the truck's already half full. So I don't have the space on the truck. So the ability to replan that in terms of transfer that onto another shipment, and then I can organize that load. So helping with partial loading, those sort of functionality. Improvements to the picking process, we'll see, for example, pick line work grouping, so I can have better sorting and management of the pick lines for the pickers to go and pick. Put to pick walls. So this is starting to move into some of the improvements that we've been working on to connect to materials handling equipment. So whether that's conveyor belt systems as a simple sequencing. So we have new sequencing, slotting numbers, for example, that we can use with waves and work templates, for example. They're all capabilities to help us as we have larger and larger customers that are using more automation in their warehouse as opposed to just workers going to the location where they know, for example. Small parcel shipping, so we have a pack station when the inventory has been picked and put to a staging location. The pack station, we've added a new service or adding a new service capability so that when I get ready for pack and I've weighed my carton, then I can do a call out to the carrier to get my label printed. So we've added that as a generic service. So in the implementation, there's a small bit of connection that you'll have to do to connect to the end service, but we've improved that framework, for example. Things like guided cluster picking, guided work sequencing, all of these around optimizing the picking processes within the warehouse. Improvements to the inventory control, so new statuses. So I can have them on locations. I can have them on LPs or pallets, for example. So locations has been a typical ask, which is a forklift driver might run into a racking, so that racking might be out of action. So we needed some mechanism to tell the system that those locations are out of action, so that when it generates a location suggestion, it ignores those locations. So we have new statuses so that the locations can be marked as offline temporarily, for example, until that spill is cleaned up or that inventory is replenished in that location. When we talk about replenishment, that's been an area that we wanted to improve performance on, especially when customers have been trying to run a wave and replenishment at the same time. So new capabilities around min-max replenishment, so it'll trigger based on certain min-max points, which is a little bit more efficient for some customer scenarios. Replenishment over capacity. We have customers that have high volume peak times where I might need to have our typical stocking locations are full, so I'll have a temporary location where I'll overfill to that, and then at least we can send pickers to those locations when we have that overfill. So really trying to deal with some real world sort of scenarios in terms of what customers run into and how do they improve the both outbound and inbound sort of activities. So you'll find a lot of this set up within the warehouse management module. I won't go through all of the capabilities, but just to sort of show you, a lot of it is there if you wanted to start to work with it. If you are a D365 customer, you can enable these through preview codes if you want to be part of the preview program so that you can try a lot of these things out. We've been releasing this in releases since 10.0, so earlier in the year, incrementally releasing a lot of this functionality over the months as we've released the point releases. So a lot of this functionality is already there in the product if you're interested in looking at it. A few more pieces are coming in the next couple of months through to the April release, for example. So you'll find these, for example, the additional wave label printings. When we look at our work templates, for example, you'll have new types of work templates. For example, we have had a cross-docking functionality before, but it was a fairly simplistic cross-docking. So there's now a new work template that we can configure to do opportunistic cross-docking when I've got goods coming in, and then I can just move them over to the outbound shipment staging location, for example. So we've got work templates to control that. The quality management, new work templates to control what happens in quality. So item sampling, for example, connected to our quality order process. So new controls to really help people configure the process that they need. So when we look at locations, for example, you'll see some of this set up within the application. So you'll see the new statuses like location status, and so therefore you can set those statuses on the product. As well, when we look at inventory control or location strategies, one of the things that we've had in the product, if a customer is in the typical process of tracking items by batch, we've had the ability to have a location strategy, which is FIFO, for example, to find product. And so that's fine if you're using batch, but if you don't, we still have customers that want to have a good rotational sort of policy of their stock. So there are new capabilities around FIFO and LIFO in terms of trying to pick first in, first out product based on an inventory aging of that, even if you're not using batch. So there's a lot of capabilities that we're trying to add in to improve that overall sort of process, inventory control, and cycles of moving goods in and out of the warehouse. So I'm just picking out a few sort of examples, but a lot of this is in the product if you're interested in having a look at what we've been working on if some of those are of interest. But as we've had quite tremendous growth around D365, we've had quite a lot of large customers using the D365 implementation in the cloud, using those mobile device capabilities, all of those things connected back to the cloud. So we want to keep helping those customers improve and grow as they grow their business, for example. So some additional capabilities that we've been working on and a few things that we're looking at from a future point of view. Master planning, we touched on master planning a little bit before in terms of the planning service. But what we also have is the ability to help customers when we look at the planning setup. So master planning can be quite complex because there's a lot of parameters that need to be set up. So we have a new planning setup wizard. This allows you to go and look through the parameters that we've had common support requests on, and so we can give feedback to the customer on how they can actually configure the planning service. So there is a new planning service wizard, for example. You can see this within the application when we have a look at the master plans. So within here, I have a setup wizard, and then it'll guide me through. I can put in my parameters. I'll just put in some random numbers. And as you go through, it'll give you the questions in terms of what you need to look at, what capabilities that you need to go and help you do the setup to avoid going to all of the different places. So this is really just trying to help customers use the product in more efficiently. We're also adding a master planning process visualization. This has been a common feedback. We've had a grid-based view in terms of what item are we currently at, the statistics about the planning, but trying to plan that or at least give you a visualization of what's happening with it, so therefore you can monitor that as it goes through and help you with detecting issues. So these are important things for that overall sort of optimization of processes. Things like consolidation of planned orders during parallel firming, again, optimization capabilities, so new parameters in terms of firming and how I might be able to get them in from a performance perspective. We're constantly looking at performance, given that we now operate the cloud service, and we can use that telemetry of where we see customers having performance issues and then introduce new features to help deal with performance. So across all of the areas, and this is one example, but across all the areas we have that insight to help. So I've sort of showed you some things as we've gone through, so I won't do another one-off specific demo, but a few things that we're working on coming into the 2020 cycle. So a few things that we're looking at is we have a lot of feedback around the improvements around product information management, especially bridging that gap between product lifecycle management and the ERP. So we're not going to introduce product lifecycle management, but that improvement around bringing that data in and managing that once it's in the ERP is something that we're looking at improving. The sales and procurement functionality, we are looking at some optimizations around the visualizations. We get a lot of feedback from customers around the number of clicks that I need to do to look at what's my back order status, how do I follow up on orders, for example. And so we have been doing some UX research based on customer feedback to help minimize some of those clicks and reorganize some of that data as a parallel path so users can have a look at some of that follow-up activity. Inventory and costing, we've been working on the cost accounting framework that was introduced a couple of versions ago and improving the ability to have a look at things like dual inventory valuation. Today, I can set up an item, but it has one inventory valuation on it. But if some customers might have two divisions within a legal entity, and I might want to value it differently. So some of those sort of capabilities that customers have been asking for as we get larger and larger customers. One of the other thing is in AX 2012, we had a customer portal and we introduced, we also had a vendor portal. In D365, we reintroduced the vendor portal as the vendor collaboration workspace, and so we have that capability. We hadn't really done anything on the customer side for the B2B type scenarios. So of course we have the whole retail functionality for the e-commerce side for the B2C type scenarios, so those functionality has been released, but in the core B2B scenarios, we're looking at improving that functionality for the traditional distributor that needs to have some level of interaction with the back-end functionality. So improvements around that is something we're looking at. Continued work around the CDS integration, so moving this data into CDS so that you can use it within the full ecosystem of the Power Platform. Those are quite important capabilities. We're looking at taking advantage of that data that is in CDS and of course moving more data to CDS so that you can build Power Apps on top of that, use the Power BI. Of course, a lot of that work around CDS in moving the data into the data lakes, we're taking advantage of with intelligence. So some things that we're working on is in the supply chain insights is what we're calling the work that we're working on. So essentially looking at leveraging the AI Builder. So within the Power Platform, it was announced back in June. The Power Platform has a capability called AI Builder, which enables the citizen developer to actually build an AI model on data that they might want to use. So So that capability we're looking at bridging within the ERP application so that we can look at supply chain metrics. Some of the ones that we're looking at is the first sort of indicators that we're looking at releasing around supplier lead time performance, inventory max min calculations. We can use an AI model to help do some of those optimizations, for example. So those are some of the things that we're working on in 2020 to introduce more capabilities across the board in terms of functionality that customers can use to optimize their business and really drive forward in the process of using Dynamics for their operations. So I've got about 5 minutes left. That's really the key capabilities that I wanted to sort of cover. So I'll leave it open for a few little questions. Obviously, there's session resources there. It's worth having a look at our release notes. Some of these things that I've mentioned there were covered in our release notes. And some will update as we get into later in the year. So the release notes are always a good way to keep track of things that we're working on. It's also worth having a look at all of our communities. We do take a lot of feedback from our communities. So if you are working with DC365 or looking at getting into it, our community is a good way to have a look at what's happening with the products and what customers are reporting feedback on, for example. So with that, I might leave it open for a couple of questions, if anyone has any sort of questions. Mike?
Lachlan, you just mentioned the customer portals. Do you have a time frame on those?
Yeah, so we're looking at getting something ready for a private preview in the April timeframe. So it would be specifically around introductory sort of scenarios, which is a customer opening up a portal to allow your end customers to have a look at order history, basic reordering in terms of see my previous orders, copy to a new order sort of scenario, stuff like that. So we are working on some new framework sort of features. So we'll probably have limited feature functionality, but once we get the framework around the invite process, the contact administration, that sort of thing, then we can build new features on top of it. So April is kind of when we're looking for a private preview for that. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I just wanted to know, is that going to tie in at all to the current vendor collaboration portal? Just because in some instances, our customers have had customers and vendors who are actually the same party.
Right. Yep. So without giving too much away, because we're just in the process of sort of speccing it out at the moment, we are looking at, for example, the whole invite process we've added for the vendor, but not on the customer side. And there is some trickiness with getting a user configured and using guest accounts with the Azure B2B piece, for example, and stuff like that. So we're looking at introducing some new framework features on the customer side first, and then we would look at essentially having one set of infrastructure that'll do both customer and vendor. So that's the key piece that we're sort of working on piloting for April, and then we'll look at it. Because we have customers, even Microsoft internally, we use the vendor collaboration portal, but the internal teams have built some new invite processes improvements there. So we're taking that feedback back to look at both the customer and the vendor side. But first scenarios around customers, but yeah, we are eventually take that to vendor as well. So yeah.
Yeah, hi. So for planning optimization, I noticed on the release note that it was earlier planned also as a standalone microservice for like AX 2012 to integrate with. Is that totally off the books or something you're still considering?
It's something that we are still considering. On the slide, there was the yellow boxes, which is stuff that we're still sort of working on. Like things like improvements around scheduling, those integrations. So it's still a goal that we want to be able to have the ability to bring in data that's not in D365 as a demand signal, so that we can produce planned orders, production purchase orders, for example. So it's still something that's being looked at in the context of we realize that customers might want to use this capability to do their purchasing production, but they've still got legacy systems that they're going to use, and that could be still AX 2012. So it is still a target scenario that we want to address. So yeah, still being worked on.
Follow-up question on that. will there be a separate SKU for that planning service, or will that be out of the box available for all Dynamics 365 customers?
Yeah, so good question. We did split up the licensing to supply chain and finance over the core finance and operations licensing. So it's within the supply chain SKUs from that point of view. So that's the current positioning of that functionality. Yep.
You were mentioning that the production is still working on. Do you have a time frame when that will be ready?
The production, so the extra work around planning with production, for example. So those things are being worked on next year. So there'll be improvements in April and October releases. So, yep.
Thank you.
Cool. No more questions? All right. I know the session was kind of short. I appreciate hanging around for the conference if you've been here for the whole week, but I appreciate you listening in. And if you are working with D365, we appreciate you working with it, the product. So enjoy the last couple of days of the conference. And so thanks very much.